Welcome to Four Quarter Lives, a podcast exploring the profound impact of longer, healthier, and more engaged lives, not only for ourselves and our couples, but also for companies and countries. I'm Avivah Wittenberg-Cox, and on this week's Four Quarter Lives, I'm talking with the founder and editor-in-chief of Noon, a web resource for women who've reached the midpoint of life and know that another half beckons, both personally and professionally. Eleanor is an award-winning editor, writer, and broadcaster. She worked for the Sunday Times in the UK for 23 years as editorial director and editor of the Sunday Times magazine. She's also a columnist and interviewer, and she's interrogated everyone from Mikhail Gorbachev to Sheryl, Sandberg, and Theresa May. She is, you will see, a force of nature, as well as a force for good. So today I'm absolutely delighted to have a friend and colleague, Eleanor Mills, with us on Four Quarter Lives. Eleanor, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
You've created this amazing Noon movement out of your own personal experience with both age and gender around a very unfriendly and badly brought up employer. So let's start with what happened to you, when and why.
Well, I think like many women who approach 50 within the media industry, I'd worked for a very big newspaper for 23 years, the Sunday Times, and they brought in a new editor and suddenly my services were no longer required. That was a huge blow, personal and professional.
Talk about a sudden wake up.
It was a massive catapult into a massive midlife shift. And at the time, it felt horrible, outcasting from tribe. I felt like I'd been pushed off a roof. It was completely grim. And it was also right at the beginning of the pandemic. But now...
Double trouble, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if I look back now 3 years on, it probably is the best thing that's ever happened to me. It's been amazing. The path I've been on since and what I've learned and how much happier I am is, has been great. But I will not deny that the being made redundant was really, really unbelievably horrible and painful.
I'm sure a lot of our listeners can completely empathize, as so many of them, and now currently as so many companies are letting off tens of thousands of people that they're in midlife. This impact is rippling around. So how did you recover, and how did you get the idea for Noon? Where did that emerge from in the depths of this despair and shock?
Yeah, the recovery, well, I suppose the pandemic was a huge moment of transition for everybody. So I think in some ways being whacked just before it was probably a kind of blessing in disguise, because it's not like everything that I'd been doing at my old employer was going on. Basically, from the moment that I left, they were all at home trying to put out a newspaper from their bedrooms. It was hideous. I actually think you
weren't isolated and weird. You were part of a much larger.
Yeah, I was part of a much larger thing. And I think what really helped was, A, I was at home with all my family, which was fab. And B, I did lots of walks. I had lots of time for myself, which I hadn't had. I've been a working mum. I've been on a huge national newspaper since I was in my early 20s. It kind of gave me a moment to pause and to think about why I'd worked as hard as I had for so long. I mean, I'd been so successful, and I don't say that in a boasting way, but I've been so successful that I really had ticked a hell of a lot of achievement boxes. And I think I was kind of asking myself, well, how much success is enough? At what point do you decide that those drivers have kind of run their course, And I think it also, once I'd recovered from the shock of it, it gave me a real opportunity to kind of work on myself a bit. I was describing it to somebody the other day as being a bit like a large kind of unruly bush that needed a good pruning, like a wisteria.
Very flattering. With your hairstyle, that goes very well.
See, I've got very mad curly hair. So I felt a bit like a really wild wisteria, or a wisteria that had just been kind of growing and sprouting, which had been really kind of cut back. And I think that what allowed me to do was it's really allowed me to kind of concentrate my energies and really think about me kind of as me, which I think I kind of hadn't really done, which really fits in a lot with what you're talking about the 4 quarter lives. So I got the idea for Noon. Like all good journalists, I'd been a columnist for years for the Sunday Times. And so I knew that things that were happening to me tended to also be kind of really registering with other people. I mean, I knew that if something was really a big thing in my life...
You know how to pick up the vibes and the trends.
Yeah, well, I think I think there's a confidence which is that if you're being beset by something, then other people will probably care about it too. So I had this idea for Noon because I thought, if I'm in such trouble in my own transition, and I can remember Googling redundancy and getting the HMRC website, which I can promise you was not inspiring.
HMRC, for our international listeners, will be the UK government website on some kind of
tax.
Transition.
It's Her Majesty's Revenue, and it's like the IRS. It was not inspiring. So, and what I was looking for was something which would guide me from where I was in this kind of pit of despair, feeling like everything was a disaster, into what my next kind of iteration might be. I felt quite strongly right from the beginning that I didn't want another job as a newspaper executive. That I was going to set off in a new direction. But I just couldn't see anything there. I mean, you could kind of Google like reinvention, you get 50 ways to reinvent yourself.
A very classic state, right? You absolutely know you no longer want to do what you were, but you have absolutely no visibility on what you do want to do and what's next. So that's pretty representative and a good foundation. And so was Noon set up basically as your way to figure it out?
Well, no, Noon set up because I thought, well, if I'm really good at finding resources, I'm a journalist, I'm out there to find information, to find stories that might help me. And I just couldn't find anything which acted like what I was looking for, but like the white pebbles, Hansel and Gretel's pebbles out of the wood with the Wicked Witch, away from the house that would take me into this, out of the dark forest, into a new future. And I just couldn't find anything that was doing that 3 years ago. And so I've always been a great believer in the kind of President Obama thing of you need to be the change that you want to see in the world. If it doesn't exist, then you need to create it. So I set up Noon because I thought this is the site that I want now.
I couldn't find and needed.
And I couldn't find it, and I needed it. And I actually think that that's quite a good basis for a new business or a new kind of venture, which is this is a service that I need, which doesn't exist. So I'm going to set it up. And I was jolly lucky because I had an amazing network from having been a very senior editor for 25 years. I also found an investor very quickly because she really believed in what I was trying to do. So it was kind of one of those things where I had this idea and then suddenly it kind of suddenly had its moment and it suddenly started to happen. And really what it was about was I'm a great believer in the power of stories and storytelling. I know that helps and works in changing people's attitudes and helping. So I really Noon was set up to be inspirational stories of how particularly women had pivoted at midlife into a new chapter. And so I called it Noon because I'd read The 100-Year Life.
I love the name. That was when I first read the name. I said, this woman understands.
And I love that idea that at 50 in The 100-Year Life, we're only halfway through. That made me feel more optimistic. And also I began to see so many incredible women around me who had a similar thing happen to them like me, tipped out of media at about 50 or whatever it was, and had then gone on to do some amazing things. So the strapline on Noon is so much more to come. And I became obsessed by these stories of people who pivoted in midlife and how it kind of exciting and how amazing this next kind of phase could be. But I also could see that none of that was being reflected in the wider culture. So I've always been interested in the kind of male lens of newspapers, particularly. And then I became really interested in the effect of women, that whole thing around, women kind of have a sell by date. We can talk about that some more in a while. But so Noon was about tackling gendered ageism and tackling those stereotypes and really telling the stories of incredible things that you could do at 50 that you weren't done. And
we're 3 years in. Noon is now practically a movement here in the UK. It's wonderful. I have very much enjoyed being a part of it and going on some of your retreats, which were wonderful, and partaking in everything from book clubs to speaking engagements. Where are you now? You've put the word Queenager on the map, so please explain what it is and why you've done it. And then a little bit what your vision is now for the future. What's it going to become?
So Queenager, like the very word Noon itself, for me is a kind of rebranding in the name. So really what I'm trying to do is to change the narrative that our culture tells about the later stages of women's lives. So I'm trying to build a business, and I'll tell you a bit more about that. But what I'm really trying to do is to change the story, to really shift the story that we tell about what women are for, how we value them. So I think in our culture, there's an obsession with youth. And when it comes to women, there's an obsession with them being fanciful, hot, and fecund. That's basically how we're valued in our kind of current society, and certainly within the mainstream media. So I was really interested in looking at all the things that women can be when those things are not the things that define them. And so Noon today is all about empowering, making feel more confident these groups of women. And as you know, you come to our Noon circles where we get the women together. I do a newsletter every week on Substack called The Queenager. And I came across this word, the Queenager, because one of the first things we did when we set up Noon is we did a big piece of research with the management consultancy firm Accenture, which is the biggest study so far of women 45 to 65. I'm a bit of a boffin. I like a bit of data. And that was really fascinating because it's so interesting when one's own kind of preconceptions or one's own kind of instincts are then borne out by this really big weight.
Very satisfying, isn't it? I was right all the time.
I was right, exactly. Really cheering, really cheering. And the Queenager moniker came about because one of the women in the research said, I feel like a teenager, but in my own house with posh sheets and nice tea and things like that. And so that really kind of stuck in my mind that this was like a kind of new teenager phase, and they were talking about going to rock concerts and feeling very free once their children had flown the nest. And then I spent a lot of time in Jamaica, and in Jamaica they have this whole thing about older women being queens. So kind of the Queenager thing, just kind of, I'm a journalist, I've written millions.
You've basically done a rebranding campaign from crones to queens.
Oh, I hate the crones and hags and stuff. I really don't. I mean, I don't want to be a hag and I don't want to be a crone, but I would like to be a queenager. That sounds fun. And the whole point about the queenager is that you come into your prime in midlife. And what's really interesting is that I've been talking about this stuff for a couple of years, and then suddenly there's Michelle Yeoh at the Oscars going, don't let anybody say you're past your prime. And the British actress Helena Bonham Carter was on Women's Hour here the other day saying at 56 she feels like she's just coming into her prime. So I think we're beginning to shift the story.
Actually, I think we're also beginning to fess up to a reality that we might have known, that this is a very nice stage of life, particularly for women, but we haven't almost dared share that because it seems slightly politically incorrect, what with all these generational issues and, inequalities, that people are very, very careful, I find, about saying, wow, this is way better than I thought.
I don't know, maybe a bit of that. I think that the mainstream media are not interested in older women. The only women that they want to portray who are older are ones who look incredibly young.
Absolutely. The heroic stance of the aging superwoman.
Yeah, exactly. So kind of the only good older woman in the mainstream culture is one who looks like she's still kind of 25, but
Helen Mirren or something. Yeah,
Gwyneth Paltrow or kind of the whole fuss about Madonna recently. I mean, I don't see the Rolling Stones making their faces look like smooth babies before they go out on stage. They're quite happy to be wrinkly reptiles.
So tell us the reality of Queenagers. What's the profile? What do we know? What's been studied, measured? You've done some. What's still really unknown, ignored?
The most interesting thing, I think, that came out of our research, which was in kind of several stages. So the main thing is this idea that Queenagers are forged in fire. And that really made sense to me because it resonated with my own, this really dark time, this visit into the underworld, where you almost have to kind of go to regenerate, to kind of re-find yourself. And there's a lot of that in all the ancient myths. I've been going back to the Assyrians, kind of Aanna, who goes right down into the underworld, and then Ezekiel comes to rescue, and she's hung on a hook for kind of, and while she regenerates, and then she comes back to life. So there's lots of that kind of.
So we've all been hung on a hook for a few decades. I think that resonates.
Yeah. Well, I certainly felt like I've been hung on a hook maybe for a few months. I tend to do things quite quick. So this forged in fire idea is what we found in the research is that more than 50% of Queenagers have had 5 big, massive life events by the time that they were 50. And many of those took place in a kind of concertina between about 45 and 50. So we're talking divorce, bereavement, redundancy, elderly parents coming to bits, teenagers. We've got an epidemic of mental illness at the moment among teenagers. So lots of women really, really having challenging situations with their teens. Then if you add into that a bit of your own health issues, a bit of menopause, it's a lot which hits women at this point. So we talk about that at noon as the midlife pinch point. But I think what's interesting and what nobody talks about is that after that pinch point is this amazing possibility of renaissance. And we saw that in the research, so that the women who'd been through the most were then the most likely to be happy. So they talk about being delightedly divorced, or I really feel like I'm just getting the hang of life. And you're nodding. I mean, it's really funny when they talk about this to a room of women, everybody nods, they go divorced for, oh yeah, I've got a tick. But I think that there's also this amazing optimism that comes from that experience, that wisdom, that knowing that you can survive, that you can kind of replete unto yourself, that you know who you are and you know what you want. So that's the Forged in Fire bit. And that I think is incredibly powerful. And that optimistic arc.
Late love and the happiness that women find in the mating they may do in maturity. So I can completely vouch for the going through the fire.
Exactly. So the sweetness of it. So it can be love. It can be, for me, I feel so fired up by this business that I've started and this community and this movement that I'm building. For other people, it's kind of going back and maybe writing the novel that they'd always wanted to write, or that I really found this really strong thing in the research about people going back to find the dreams that they'd had when they were younger, that real self-actualization piece in Q3. And I think that that's so true. And we don't talk about it in the culture, but it also comes after darkness. You don't get to the sunny uplands without having done the hero's journey and having done the kind of work on yourself and done the struggle.
Although I'd love to recast it as a heroine's journey. Can we shift it just a little bit?
I think we can shift it to a Queenager journey. Definitely.
Okay, let's do that. I want to flip from the individual story of women emerging into third quarter, and just, you're also representing a huge segment of the population that is the dominant purchaser, decision maker, influencer in the vast majority of households. We don't talk about that too much either, nor do you get the impression in advertising and marketing circles that that's yet quite landed. What do you?
No, it hasn't landed at all. So that is that's the serious thrust of the kind of financial pit of noon. So the other thing that we find in the research, so Forged in Fire, then we find how do these Queenagers feel about themselves? So half of them feel completely invisible in the society. 63% say that they would be way more likely to buy from a brand that represented them. And these women, Forbes calls them super consumers. They are behind over 90% of all household spending decisions, because they're buying things both for their elderly parents and for their kids who can be young or their age. So they're the glue right in the middle of society, which is making so many financial decisions. And yet no brands are speaking to them directly, except for things like in counterparts, or maybe the odd cruise, or a bit of kind of life insurance where they're always walking down the beach with a silver fox. And all of that is just so off-putting to the Queenagers. So I think that there's a huge business opportunity here for businesses and brands to think about these women as their customers. Particularly in the recession, these women have got more money than other things. So they outspend millennials by 250%, over half of the breadwinners. And the really interesting thing is that there have never been women like this at this point in midlife before. The really key thing about the Queenagers is we are a pioneering generation. And it's there in the UK census. So in 2019, women over 40 start earning more money than women under 40 for the first time ever. So this is a new thing.
Yeah, it's that educated boomer generation moving through.
Yeah, and this is we're kind of Gen X, so it's not, we're kind of, it's like the next lot on from the boomers. And we have worked ever since we left university. We've had careers. A lot of us have been the main income earners in our families. And so we're hitting this midlife point with a lot of financial firepower and a very different attitude about what that midlife moment looks like. So in the UK, we've had a big thing here around menopause, which is beginning to...
I was going to ask you about that. What do you think of that?
Well, I think that is the first shout of the Queenagers, and it's about a huge bit of health inequality. In the UK, GPs are doctors. they didn't have mandatory training on menopause till last year. So you could be a GP and basically not have had any training on the menopause, which happens to 52%.
That's pretty unbelievable, isn't it?
Yeah. And there's some really terrible statistics, like, a quarter of women who went to their doctor with menopausal symptoms got given antidepressants, not HRT. And there's also huge intersectionality on this. So the poorest women in the UK are half as likely to get HRT as the richest ones. So I'm not denying that there's a huge health inequity here. And then things like the menopause charity in the UK think that 1 in 10 Queenagers have left their jobs because of menopause. But what has happened, as often happens with victim women, is this menopause conversation has been kind of weaponized now, I think, against women. And I think it's now playing into a gendered ageist narrative. So women are going from, in your 20s, everyone tries to hit on you. In your 30s and 40s, everyone thinks you're about to have a baby. And then as soon as you get out of that now, they go, oh, she's like a kind of walking hot flush. She's a menopausal disaster zone. And I don't think that does women any good. And for me as a feminist, feminism is about equality. It's about freeing women from their biology, not defining them by it, actually at the point where it becomes kind of irrelevant. So a lot of brands...
And you don't want the dominant conversation around this extraordinary set of decades to be so linked to one.
No, and for some women, menopause is absolutely dreadful. But for the majority, you might feel a bit bad. But if you get the right treatment, you're fine. And so I think it's kind of weaponized, this thing. So they're saying every kind of older woman is now like menopausal. It's the only thing that companies are providing for women.
You get the feeling that it's a product pushing.
It is. It's a
sell a bunch of stuff.
And it's a menopause branding opportunity. I know in the New York Times just did a big piece about the menopause gold rush. But for me, this Queenager moment, the power of these women, what they're capable of, is way, 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 way bigger than menopause. Menopause is a small component, I think. So it's kind of important, but not crucial.
So this amazing group of women, a historic rise of the first generation of a massively empowered older women segment. Let's take a look at where companies and countries are on integrating this reality. The UK government is very busy trying to get its 50 plus back to work after COVID. Are companies playing their part?
No. So the other big part of our research is around women and work, and particularly Queenagers 45 plus. What do they want from companies and what are they getting? Yeah. And I think the context of this is really interesting. So Sheryl Sandberg's big piece of research last year, the Lean In McKinsey report, was called The Great Breakup. And it basically said for every woman being promoted to director level, or SVP as you call it in America, there were 2 women were leaving. And there is an exodus from the workforce of the women at this point, which is a huge problem for all of us who've been pushing for gender equity, particularly at the top, for a really long time. And part of the stubbornness, I think, of that shift, as a journalist, I've been writing about, women on boards and all that kind of thing for forever. So in the UK, FTSE 100, still only 8 female CEOs. Fortune 500, I think you're now up to about 10, or kind of, I think it's about 10%, but it's pretty stubbornly low. And that is because corporates are losing the Queenagers out of their workforces. The global chair of the 30% Club told me in an interview for The Telegraph a couple of weeks ago that what we're seeing is a second brain drain, that women are now coming back to work after maternity, but then they're dropping out of companies' droves from about kind of 45 plus. So I think that what our research shows about the reasons for that is really interesting. So what the women want is flexibility and autonomy over their kind of working hours and, how and where they do things is 16 times more important to them than status. And yet status, kudos, the kind of big office, the flash salary, the big title is how companies reward seniority. So that's not working for the Queenagers. And then the other thing that they really want is to feel valued by their employers, which a lot of them don't because they're kind of getting made redundant because they hit the kind of not pleasing gendered ageism bit. And on top of that, they want purposeful and meaningful work. They feel like they've got a lot to offer.
And a kind of obvious trifecta that seems really impossible to find And
that purpose bit I think is really interesting because the most educated women are the least likely to have children, and nearly a third of university educated Queenagers, so the kind of ones who are at the top of these corporates, don't have children. So therefore, there's a really interesting piece, I think, around purpose and legacy for these women. Because if they don't have kids, then that all is a bit different. And I think what's happening is for a lot of women, or what we see in our new research, what the Queenagers tell me in endless groups that I do about this, is that they just get to a point where they can't be bothered with the internal politics anymore. They've done too much sitting in rooms, kind of placating senior male egos. As we know, as you get higher in organisations, and I certainly saw this myself as a very senior executive, it becomes more of a Boise club. And they get to a point, they're just like, I've just done this for too long. And I've had a woman say to me the other day, I just can't do it anymore. When the men sit there and they're suggesting something that we tried 10 years ago and it didn't work then, and I know it's wrong, I just can't be enthusiastic about it. So I think there's a sense that the women become less pleasing. They also are seen as less pleasing by this kind of male hierarchy. They get a bit more stroppy. They know that they have value and they just go, sod it. And actually, at that point, if you've been in a corporate for that long, you've probably got enough resources to be able to go and do something else. And you can make money at consultancy. You can set up your own business. So there are more Queenagers becoming entrepreneurs like me at a rate than any other demographic. And our companies are much more likely to be successful than those set up by others. The older entrepreneurs are much more successful, yet only 2% of VC, or less than 2% of VC capital is going to female founders. So that, yet again, you get kind of hit with a kind of, another whammy. But the interesting point about senior women, I think, in corporates is that most corporates are not even thinking about this. It's just not on their agenda. I wrote a big piece for the Financial Times a little while ago, and I was trying to find companies that were doing good stuff for their senior women. Yes. Quite.
So 3 things companies should be doing if they want women at all ages and levels.
Well, I think offering flexibility, I think having a conversation. So I'm starting to go into some companies and say to them, okay, if you want to retain your senior women, and we do workshops with them based on our research around what it is that they want and what they're getting from the company. So I think that's a good place to start. But I think to really bear in mind, and what we see with all older workers, is the necessity for maybe a conversation that just because you've been doing something for such a long time, you may have got quite senior, sometimes it's time for a change, and there's something really energizing about doing something different. And companies are going to need to start having conversations with their senior people going, okay, you've been doing this for a long time. What would you actually like to do? Not we're making you redundant or we're shuffling you off, but going, you've been doing this for a long time. What would you like to do? Are you really interested in sustainability, maybe? We know that for this cohort, meaning and purpose becomes really important. I think companies should be asking, particularly their senior women, what does that look like for you? How could you help us? What should we be doing? And really tapping into that experience and wisdom and all the ideas that they've got, rather than letting the women leave and set up companies which then do it themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. So how much do you think that is dramatically different than men at this age and stage? Because we're hearing a lot about this from, I'm sure that many of our male listeners are saying, I'm exactly the same. I want flexibility and part-time and a gentle offloading, not a sudden cliff end retirement.
I think it probably is true for men, but I think that men are still getting kind of shuffled through to the higher echelons in a way that women aren't. And I also think that the men aren't being hit with this maelstrom of other kind of midlife stuff. So they're probably less involved with the teenagers falling apart. We know from the statistics that they're not the ones who are driving 4 hours, to go and look after their ailing mother who's just had a fall. So that kind of the emotional kind of family payload of all of that stuff also really falls on women at this point. So I think what women need is some flexibility and some support from their employers through those difficult times.
So you're great. You're a fantastic model of this entrepreneurship alternative that you are actually seductively holding out to women at this age. I'm surprised that companies are hiring you, because I would think that they would see you and say, oh God, this is too much of a good thing. I just want to end on what's been the impact. You're obviously flourishing and you love and you're very, very passionate about what you do. What's the impact on the people around you, your former colleagues, your kids, your husband, your family? What do they see or learn from your own transition, do you think?
I think they're quite excited by it, quite inspired by it. I do a lot of keynote talking now all over the place about this, about Queenagers, about this moment, about my own story, about that shift into Q3 and what you need to do to make a success of it. I think that we're really very much on the beginning of people understanding about this. I mean, the 100-year life is relatively new. The shift for women, again, is relatively new. But as soon as you start to talk about it and going, hang on, there's now this bit of good life. I'm really interested in this stuff about health span rather than lifespan. So if you can keep your health going, you can basically have between 50 and 75 or maybe beyond, where you're still in really good nick and you can do all the things that you always wanted to do. But I think we're still very stuck on that tripartite, educated job retirement model, which doesn't really make any sense anymore. And when you say to people, what, do you really think you're going to work for the same company for like 50 years? They look at you, they know that's not true. That's not going to work. I mean, I had a pretty good run. I was with my company for 23 years. I had a great time. So I think people know that that's not the case, but nobody's thinking about what muscles they need to be flexing in order to make this transition, or what that might look like, or someone said to me the other day, God, I did have some passions when I was younger, but I've just been so busy being a kind of corporate lawyer, I've forgotten what they were. So I think what we do a lot in the noon retreats is kind of really saying to people, okay, really tune in to yourself kind of for the first time, maybe in a decade, particularly for women who've been raising kids as well. It's like, who are you? What do you really want? What did you enjoy? What turns you on in that kind of broader sense? What actually brings you a sense of passion, purpose, fun, love, joy? I'm big on joy. And I think we should be talking about that a lot. And I think that people around me can see that I think I'm happier than I've ever been. I feel like I'm flourishing. It's been great. I love ploughing my own furrow, having the time to do the things that I want to do. I have more time with my children. I have more time with my husband. I just feel I love the autonomy of my life now. And I think that when you're made redundant, you feel like everything that you could do before goes with the job title. And what I wish somebody had told me when that happened to me was, you were brilliant in that job because you are brilliant. It wasn't a job that gave you those skills. You could do the job because you're amazing. And that's, of course, when you're made redundant, the last thing you feel is amazing. You feel like all that has been stripped.
All that's gone. And then
like
you
a huge cloak. Yeah, that's been taken away, and you're like this strange alien creature underneath. You're like, who am I without all that external status? But actually, the cloak is heavy and the cloak is constricting, and there's a huge freedom and joy in being able to use your own voice in the way that you want to. So I think everyone around me can see that that's the case, and I hope I'm kind of inspiring them to make a similar leap.
Great inspiration, Eleanor. I think you're a wonderful model of Jung's wish that the greatest gift in life is to become who you truly are. And I think you are demonstrating that in all kinds of ways and in all kinds of channels. So thank you so much for sharing this story and all the secrets that we should be learning about Queenagers, and that this is only the noon of our lives. Thank you for being with us.
Oh, well, thank you, Avivah, and thank you for all the help that you've given me on this journey, because we all need, I think the thing that you need most when you go through a big transition is a new tribe. And there's some people who've trodden that path before and who kind of, know a bit about it. And there's so many things that I've kind of stumbled upon going, wow, I think this. And you go, yes, it's called self-actualization. There's all this kind of, literature about it or whatever.
So I wrote about that somewhere.
It's like, I think I've written about that before. But we all need help on that journey. So Noon very much is trying to do kind of that big culture shift piece and trying to get brands to talk to Queenagers. But we're also a consumer-facing site where we have lots of Queenagers actually on this journey themselves. We're all going off to go wild swimming. And
so where should our listeners sign up if they want to become part of this tribe?
It's called Noon, as in the middle of the day, noon.org.uk. And my Substack is called The Queenager, actually a Substack bestseller, one of the top 10 posts on Substack last year. Because Sheryl Sandberg reached out to me when she left Facebook in her own Noon pivot. Is a great fan of what I'm doing as the Queenager. So if you'd like to get involved, come and find us, and you can sign up and become part of our community. And we've got the most incredible advisory board as well of the most amazing Queenagers, of which Avivah is of course one. So, come and join us. It's fun.
And you'll find all the links in the show notes. And I look forward, of course, to seeing you and many more of your Queenager colleagues on the podcast in the coming years. Thanks so much, Eleanor.
Thanks for having me.
For more thinking about the impact of our 4-quarter lives, you can read my column at Forbes and subscribe to my Elderberries newsletter on Substack. Let's design lives that aren't just longer, but better.